Hi, good afternoon, and for some of you it's good morning, others it's good evening, but thank you for joining on this Surviving Spikes webinar today. Looking forward to talking through sort of the Technica best practice approach to dealing with sort of large volume events on websites. Before we get started, just to do a couple of quick introductions. Really fortunate today to be joined by our CTO and co-founder, Andy Still. Andy has a real wealth of experience in the performance space, helping a number of large businesses all around the world deal with big events. Andy's also a published author, so yeah, do look out for Andy's books. There's a couple that are really sort of relevant to this topic that we'll share off the back, and you can get for free on the website. In terms of what we're going to be covering, so just before we start, I'll be sort of hosting today's webinar. My name's Tom Platt. I'm a senior account manager here at Technica, and I've been working with a lot of retailers and other businesses all around the globe, helping them deal with their big spikes in traffic and key events on their websites. In terms of just a very sort of quick background, essentially Technica was founded over 10 years ago, when Andy, who's with us today, and our other co-founder, Jeremy, originally built the Glastonbury ticketing system, and ran that platform and ran it quite successfully for a number of years, until at which point there was a really large push to online ticketing. They were only given a week's notice, and what followed was a really sharp and severe outage. The website was down for 52 hours, and effectively it was so public that people decided to print the error message on t-shirts and sell them at the festival. So a really public experience, you know. So Andy's been through a really sort of traumatic experience with a major outage. That was some 10 years ago. Andy and Jeremy, our co-founders, then re-architected that system, and it sold out in record time. That led to the creation of Technica, getting on for nearly 10 years ago now, with the express purpose of helping people build more performant, scalable websites that can deal with big events. So just a bit of history there in terms of why we're interested in this space. That'll be sort of the last sort of pitch bit. We're keen to sort of give you a lot of sort of insight from here on in. In terms of what we're going to cover, obviously introductions we just covered off. I'm going to be going through some research and findings in terms of, particularly we're going to be focusing on Black Friday and the industry, why it's such a big spike, why it's challenging. I'm going to be going over that piece, then passing over to Andy, who will be going through the sort of best practice approach for websites. So this is a combination of the things that he's written in various books, along with working with a number of the world's leading retailers to form a sort of best practice approach. And we'll end on a Q&A. We're expecting today's webinar to take around about 30 minutes, maybe 40, and we'll have time for a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions at any point throughout the webinar, please feel free to put them in the question box, so we can jump onto them at the end. But yeah, in terms of just setting the scene, obviously Black Friday 2017, getting on for 32 days, depending on where you are, about 32 days and 9 hours away. Why is it such a big event? Well, particularly, I know we've got sort of global listeners on here. Just in the UK alone, last year sales were up by 12% on the day, with UK retailers taking around about £1.23 billion in revenue through that sort of major shopping event. Traffic increase, you know, 220% traffic increase than we've seen before, and particularly in that traffic, a large amount of that traffic, a bigger amount of traffic than we've ever seen before on mobile devices. That also correlates to the really large spike in mobile apps downloaded. We're talking a lot to retailers today. There was certainly, you know, 1.2 million apps installed last Black Friday. If you have a shopping app, do be prepared for that to be downloaded. There was certainly a lot of apps probably downloaded through offers, you know, so not necessarily retail apps, but, you know, a lot of activity on the apps on the day, a lot of mobile traffic. We're seeing that as a real trend. You know, unfortunately, you know, it was The Guardian that reported that there was around 50 major UK retailers that went down last year. So that was their report. We did a whole piece of research, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more as we get into the webinar, on how ready people were, having met with around about, you know, 20-25 different retailers around the globe, helping them get ready. We did a little exercise on how ready with the industry, and ahead of last year, we found sort of 50 major sites that, you know, a lot of major sites that weren't fully ready. In terms of just actually looking at Black Friday as an issue for retail, really interesting. One of the other webinars we hosted is what we call the outage report, where we looked at all sort of industries, not just retail, all industries globally, and looked at how many outages did we see across the internet, what websites were having downtime. We looked at insurance, travel. There was all sorts of things, all sorts of website issues. But by far the sector with the most outages out of any was retail, followed by sort of the travel and ticket industries. But retail was the sort of predominant site. And in sector where we saw the most outages over 2016, 2017. Interestingly, sort of further detail on that, of the outages we saw in the retail sector, 34% of them were actually driven by the Black Friday sales period. And, you know, the people we're speaking to, most of the websites we work with expect a minimum of a 10% increase, a 10 times, increase in traffic sort of from their normal sort of day-to-day operating levels. So you can see that it's certainly something, you know, that the research would suggest is a big opportunity for retailers in terms of revenue. It's certainly something that our research would suggest is a challenging time for retailers, and one that's still causing the industry problems, as these sort of outage reports have shown. Of course, I think it's important, you know, it is great that we're seeing less and less sites having downtime, a lot more people scaling up, a lot more people putting in mitigation techniques, and a lot more people spreading their sales. We're seeing a lot less websites having downtime, but I think now as we move away from, you know, actually it's about avoiding your site crashing completely, I think now it's about looking at how do we keep those sites performant and maintain user experience during key events as well. We did, you know, so you can see here, you know, the cost of an outage, you know, £1.3 million was the sort of average cost to a retailer during a key shopping day, you know, with around 50k of a cost per hour. Obviously, if you're a bigger site, this could be even more, but, you know, certainly some cost there of just the outage. But what was really, you know, really interesting is we looked at, you know, the importance of the slowdown. I thought it was really interesting to see that, you know, 79% of customers are less likely to buy if the site's slow. Most customers are suspecting a mobile site to load in under 4 seconds, you know, and 7% said that, you know, a slowdown of 1 second would impact their sort of willingness to purchase from you. So slowdowns are definitely becoming a trend for us, and becoming something that retailers need to become more and more on top of now that outages have sort of, you know, moved away a little bit. We did just on this piece what we think, you know, is really sort of interesting piece of research in this space, where we work with, you know, one of the UK's top 10 retailers, certainly one of the biggest retailers in the UK and a well-known brand across the globe. We looked at the impact that slowdowns were having on their business. So we took, you know, the number of slowdowns they had, the percentage of visitors that were affected, the conversion rates that, you know, that they saw on the visitors, their average basket size, and we timed that over sort of the period we were looking at. And, you know, the impact of slowdowns to that business alone was £3.36 million in revenue. So yes, it's certainly, you know, we think one thing to be aware of is watching out for that impact of slowdown. It's no longer good enough for a business to say we want our website to not fall down. It's important that we now say, you know, we want to maintain user experience, make that user experience as good and as rich as possible on the busy shopping days, because that's going to be one of the keys to, you know, with the revenue on the table, it's one of the keys to generating as much revenue as possible. I think the final bit of research I just wanted to talk about before we get onto sort of the best practice piece. We did a really interesting piece of research around how prepared retailers were. So we worked with 25 retailers last year, where we did a survey and workshop to understand sort of how you know, how many of them were ready, what did they do to get ready, and we measured these people against our best practice framework. And what we found, you know, lowest score out the panel, they were sort of out of 100% of being fully ready and 0 being not ready at all. The lowest score was sort of 16%. On average, most of the businesses that we spoke to were kind of about halfway there, what we see on best practice. And then some of those panelists are actually all the way there, taking it extremely seriously. And by that, you know, I mean some people really, you know, pretty much surpassed our best practice framework, with some businesses spending all year and having teams dedicated to this, you know, particularly if you're a bigger business and it represents such a large chunk of revenue. What was also really interesting for us, a lot of people we spoke to spent a month, a week, you know, 3 months. Some people, as I say, spent a year. But the average time people that we spoke to spent preparing for Black Friday was 1.5 months. So we're right in that period now where we're presenting this best practice, where we think people are starting to, or in the middle of, and hopefully more prepared than ever before, are getting ready for the kind of key shopping period and Black Friday. So that's the research. That's why we think it's such a key piece for the industry. There's obviously a lot of money on the table. We're seeing a lot of growth of mobile traffic. We're seeing a key importance around not just staying up, but staying fast, as I would call it, maintaining user experience. And so without further ado, with that in mind, I want to hand over to Andy Still, our CTO and co-founder, who's going to talk through his kind of best practice framework that we've developed over a number of years with a lot of retailers and other sort of leading businesses to create a sort of plan for how you can prepare.
Thanks, Tom. So, yeah, interesting statistics there. So what we have done now for a number of years of working with wide variety of customers, focusing on Black Friday, but on a range of other peak events, is that we've tried to distill the range of activities that you should be looking at down into a fairly simple preparedness plan that we've put together. This is a plan, as you say, you can apply this to most situations, but it's particularly relevant to Black Friday. So we'll talk through this today with Black Friday particularly in mind. Okay, so we look at phase one, which is a planning phase. And this is what you need to do before you even start undertaking any work at all. And one of the things that sort of always thought is before you start doing anything, you really need to know not only what you're up against, but where you are. And if you do that, then you can go into anything with a degree of confidence. I think old Sun Tzu put that very well there. So before you start doing any work at all or start putting any plans in place, really important first step is to get together with the wider business and agree what is actually an acceptable target for this particular event that you're looking at. And this includes not only agreeing what you think is actually a reasonable amount of traffic that you're going to see, or a reasonable amount of transactions that you want to be able to process, but also what's actually an acceptable way of dealing with the situation. Are you trying to scale to deliver and be able to cope with any amount of traffic that might hit you, or are you actually looking just to contain the spike and deal with the situation, process what you can, but actually deal with that in an elegant manner? And is this something that you can deal with, by other areas of the business and more than just technology? It makes a big difference when you start looking at scaling a system to know what you're trying to scale to. And if you're unrealistic in this, you'll spend a lot more time, money, and effort in trying to build a system that is way beyond anything you'll ever need. So it's important to be realistic and important to set these targets. And then in the event that you do get more traffic than target, then at least you've agreed as a business ahead of time that what you thought was reasonable and the system you've built was to hit certain targets. Beyond knowing where you want to be, and really important part of setting your targets is understanding what traffic is expecting, what level of usage you are actually expecting. Beyond that, just the amount of traffic, I mean, you need to look at more about what the nature of that traffic is and how it's made up. So simplest level, what are the times and dates that you'll be expecting large amounts of traffic, and how peaky will that traffic be? Is it spikes of traffic? Is it cliff edge spikes of traffic, or is it gradual increases of traffic during the day? But beyond just the time and the date, it's really important to understand what's the trigger event that's leading to that traffic. Is this something that you're controlling? Is it your marketing effort? Is it external marketing effort? Is it external events such as TV appearances? Understanding what's triggering it also reveals how much you can control it and what other actions you can put in place to mitigate it if it is a concern that you're going to get too much traffic. So once you understand the nature of that traffic, start thinking about what the user's going to be doing when they arrive in. Is this just typical traffic, or will it have a different pattern because you're pushing a particular action? You're pushing a particular special offer, which means users will take one route through your system rather than just hitting the home page and browsing and searching. Are users going to be transacting, or are they going to be signing up, or is there another action that they're expecting to take? Will they be coming in via the home page? Will they be coming in via deep links? If they are deep links, where are they to? And is there a way that you could lower the impact of that deep link page if it's a high impact page? So it's about this step is all about understanding what the traffic is and getting into quite a lot of detail, so you understand really how your system will be expected to deal with this traffic. As well as that, it's a good idea to look into who the people are actually using your system. Are they international people? Are they national people? Are they coming via mobile? Are they desktop? If they're mobile, is it sort of 3G, 4G? This is increasingly important as the amount of different touch points increases for sites. Mobile traffic is now the default use case. Mobile users have a different set of expectations typically than desktop users. Conversely to what would be reasonable, mobile users have higher expectations of performance than desk users. So it's really important to understand not only about your audience, but also the level of their expectations. What is acceptable and unacceptable to them? At what point will the system that you're providing start to become not fit for purpose? There's ways of getting that. You can do that from your existing data using analytics data or real user monitoring, or it's about understanding the trigger events that are leading to the traffic. Are they being promoted in particular environments, particular localities, that sort of thing, to understand really the type of people that will be using your system. And beyond that, it's important that you understand your current limitations. So where are you at the moment? How much traffic do you know you can handle? How much traffic have you successfully handled? How much traffic have you handled in testing? And when you started to hit the limitations of your current system, what were the problems? What were the issues that you've seen? What are your known bottlenecks that you've got? And they're a good starting point to start thinking about where the limitations are in your system and what you would have to do to be able to handle larger amounts of traffic. Beyond your system as well, are there any third-party systems that you are particularly dependent on? This could be payment providers, it could be search providers, it could be other tools that you use within your site. What are their limitations? Will they handle the amount of traffic? If not, is there a way that you can remove them or disable them? Are there any practical issues that you've got? Are you hitting any licensing limits of any of the software or components that you use? And make sure that you're not going to hit that on the event day. So having done that degree of upfront planning about understanding where you're trying to get to, the next phase is really about making sure, scoping the process and making sure you've got the right people in place for this. And one really important thing before we start here is just to accept that it isn't going to just work. If you're expecting large amounts of traffic, more than you've ever been able to handle before, don't assume it will just work, and don't assume it will be easy to get to the point where it will work. There's potentially a large amount of additional income associated with this. Assume that there will be a proportionate amount of time and effort involved in it, and this won't just come for free, and it's important it's never too early to start thinking about it. You don't have to necessarily start taking action, but you can start planning and start putting things in place to deal with situations as soon as possible, so that you can really not be rushing around making last-minute changes. I think when you're starting looking at planning it, there's three things that's really important that you do make sure that you set aside. The first is, as we've just alluded to, you do need dedicated time to do this. This isn't something that you can do in your spare time or in your downtime. this is a big project, and you need to dedicate some time where you just focus in on delivering this set of improvements. Which leads on to the next one, that you need the right people. You need not only people with time, but you need the right people set aside for this. This means people with the appropriate level of technical understanding and also business understanding, so that the people across the business can all buy into this process, and it's not just a technology effort that's going on in isolation. And it's certainly not something that you can just give to junior members of staff to try and get on with. It will require a degree of technological input and understanding of your system and the complexities and the limitations of your system and how it interacts with other systems. And lastly, and this is one that I think quite often gets pushed over, there will be budget associated with this. If you're going to do this properly, if you're going to improve your site by the level that you may need to do to hit the extra level of income that you're expecting to get from this big event, there will be tools, there will potentially be extra kit, there will be additional services, all of which will be necessary to go through this improvement process, but all of which need budgeting. So it is important that you set aside some ring-fence budget to deliver this. Moving on to the next phase, which is around actually going through the process of trying to optimize your site from where it is currently to where you need it to be based on the targets that you've set. And this, to be honest, is a relatively straightforward phase in terms of how to explain it. There's a massive degree of complexity in actually undertaking it. And it's a simple process to follow. The first is test where you are, execute appropriate performance testing, ideally on a platform that's similar to live. It could be on your live platform out of hours. That's a reasonable approach to handling performance testing. You could do it on a cut down platform and try and work out from there, but any difference you've got between your production platform and where you're testing, it's obviously a risk that you're taking in there, that things don't always scale linearly. So do the testing, find out where you are, do that before you undertake any optimization, even if there's things where you think, well, it's really obvious that we need to do this, it's fairly basic that we should definitely do this first. Test first, see where you are against your targets, carry out the optimizations, and test again to see whether those optimizations have had the effect that you hoped for, and carry on with that process until you get where you need to be. When you say that you get where you need to be, have a bit of pragmatism in that. Performance improvements generally have some low-hanging fruit, which are easy to get you close to your targets. They will again get progressively harder and harder as you get to the harder bits of optimization. Be realistic about something that is going to take months worth of effort or thousands of pounds or dollars worth of investment to get a very small improvement that takes you close to your target. Make a call on whether you're close enough to your target to actually be realistic. Carry on that process though until you're happy with it. And this is one of the points of saying give yourself enough time, is that this can be a very long running project. It can run alongside new development. If it does run alongside new development, you need to make sure that you're testing after that new development has been put in to make sure you've not undermined any of the optimizations that you've done. Beyond trying to optimize your system, the other thing you have to deal with is how to mitigate in case something unexpected happens. And with the best will in the world, you can plan as much as you like, but there'll always be things that go wrong that are outside your control or that you've not tested for. And it is really important that on a peak event day that you are prepared for failure. And that means sitting down and thinking of everything that could go wrong. And once you've determined these actions, think about if that did happen, what would be the impact of that? How serious an impact would that be, and how could we then mitigate that impact? And as well as understanding the impact, ask yourself the question, how would I know that? How would I know it was happening? So with anything that could go wrong, make sure that you've got some methodology in place so that you can detect that happening and you know how to deal with it. A good way of approaching this is to create in the sort of flight terms, have a flight manual of everything that can go wrong and the appropriate way of dealing with it. And not only the appropriate way of dealing with it, but empower people to be able to deal with it. So if something's gone wrong, people know what to do and they know they're okay to do it. And they're not having to sort of call people or go up command chains or anything like that to get approval. They can deal with the situation effectively and as quickly as possible. So having gone through all that kind of background, how do you then get prepared for the actual event itself? And this, again, doesn't start on the day itself. You need to start thinking about this ahead of time. Make sure, before the day, make sure that you've got any of your new systems or platforms in place. They're tested, you're using them in production. The peak day will not be the first day that you use them. Obviously, there's some reality in that we've all dealt with the situations of last-minute changes, but be careful around that. Make sure that if you're making changes at the last minute, do sufficient testing and get it into production. Don't think everything will just work on the day. Make sure that you've gone through and checked some of the practicalities. Make sure you know things like disk space, licenses, etc., etc. You're not going to hit any annoying things like that on the day just because you've not considered the limitations of some of your infrastructure. Make sure that you have appropriate monitoring in place, that it's working, that you can access it, the right people can access it, that it tells you all the things that you need to know based on your mitigation strategy and your flight manual that you've put in place. And make sure that monitoring has sufficient range of information, not just technical information. Make sure it's covering your business metrics as well, so that you can actually detect when something is having a negative impact, even if it's not actually having a technical impact. Make sure that you've got appropriate security monitoring in place. Make sure you've got DDoS protection in place. DDoS may not be a worry to a lot of sites most of the time, but on peak days when there's a lot more money than usual on the table, and it's kind of a one-off opportunity, that is the sort of day when potentially DDoS attacks may happen and you get held to ransom just to make the problem go away. Make sure you've got an understanding of your traffic in a degree of detail that's going through your system. Make sure you understand the impact of any human and non-human traffic that may be hitting you. So if you are getting hit by bots on your peak event, make sure you can see that and do something about it. And also make sure that any third parties that you deal with are primed and ready for your peak event. And if you need people to be available, make sure they're ready, online and contactable. On the day itself then, so this is before your peak event starts, again, make sure that everything's all working. That's a fairly obvious thing, but don't assume everything's working. Double check everything, make sure everything's all operating correctly. Any non-essential systems that you can disable so that your system is only doing the absolute necessary. Double check that you've got the necessary people in place, the monitoring is all up and working, the right people can access the monitoring systems. Any people that need to be able to access control systems can do that. Do any sort of practicalities as well. If there's caches that need warming up or there's systems that deal well after being rebooted, do all that sort of stuff. And obviously just check that when you look at your monitoring systems, make sure everything's still in order and you're not seeing any unusual activity in the traffic that's going through your system, in which case you may have to deal with that. And finally, you get to the event itself, and then the key thing around the event is don't just leave it to go on its own. Make sure you are monitoring it as it goes on, and make sure you're monitoring a range of systems. So don't just be looking at your server stats, for example. Be looking at business metrics to make sure you're still seeing the level of transactions that you would expect for the increased level of traffic. use things like real user monitoring to make sure that users are actually getting the experience that you would hope for. Monitor things like social media as well, so that you can see if there's any uncomplimentary comments being made on Twitter, that sort of thing. Then you can understand that, and you can see if you can get to the cause of it. Monitor your competition as well. So if your competition are having issues, that may impact you. So that could result in downtime for you. Their downtime could result in spikes for you, which obviously could have negative impact. You need to make sure you're ready to handle that. Equally, it could represent an opportunity in that you can then start promoting certain things, knowing that there's a load of customers out there that are not getting the service that they want. And lastly, make sure that you're on top of your traffic in general. Make sure that your human, non-human traffic is as you would expect, and there's not activity on there which will have a potentially negative impact that you could do something about. So that's all the preparation that you can put in place. And the last thing I just wanted to flag up is that you can do all the preparation that you think, and you can do all the planning for failure, but there are certain situations where things happen that you have not thought of, or there is a spike of traffic that is dramatically bigger than you can cope with. And in that situation, it is worth considering an insurance policy. And there are a number of systems that offer this kind of approach, but there's the one that we've developed in-house just for this situation, based on our experience of dealing with people with peak events who have a very particular set of needs. And we built the Traffic Defender system, which offers the protection from too much traffic to make sure that in the event that there are too many people trying to access your site, there is a degree of protection and you can control the flow of users to your system. And any users that you are unable to handle will be given a reasonable user experience of being put in a fair queue, and then they're given access when it is available. This is just a way of ensuring that no matter how big the spike is, you're able to handle it. And I think that's the last element that we have in the plan. And what I would say is part of the plan as a whole is ensuring that you are prepared for the peak event, you're ready to deal with any eventuality, and you've put the right amount of time and effort into dealing with that. And if you take one thing away from it, it is don't assume it will just work. Put the effort into understanding it and ensuring that your site can handle the amount of traffic that you're expecting and beyond that. I'll hand back over to Tom now.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, Andy. So yeah, all I wanted to do now, just while we collate all the sort of questions, if you do have any more questions for us that we're going to cover, we can do an open Q&A in the next sort of minute or two. Just wanted to really just say, you know, obviously Andy's mentioned our solution out there that's a kind of final sort of line of protection. No matter what you do, you can guarantee your events. That's obviously there, and there are other solutions available. In terms of other things we've done for a lot of businesses, you know, we've helped some major UK retailers reduce their infrastructure and be more available through optimization, you know, and that's cost saving when we're talking about businesses on enterprise architecture. We've helped businesses like ASOS become some of the fastest in the UK, taking them from 43rd to the 6th fastest UK retailer sort of in 1 year. We've helped people like Channel 4 with their major events, and we also develop solutions in-house as well. So we have a whole team here who have to deal with the exact same challenges as you guys, running the biggest sites in the world. So a lot of experience. If there's anything we can help with, do let us know. We work with a lot of retailers. I think the first thing is absolutely understanding what you can deal with and knowing if you have a bottleneck. And then, you know, we work with them, you know, sometimes as a quick fix with no code implementation, really quick. We can help people sort of just save their events. This is an example of how our queuing solutions helped one of the UK's major retailers. And, you know, this Black Friday we're probably gearing up to sit in front of around 30 of the UK's major retail sites. So yeah, if you think you guys have a headache on Friday, you know, certainly have as much pressure, if not 30 times more. So it's certainly a big day for all of us as well. So if there's anything we can help with, do let us know. I think the final couple of bits we did an interesting, this is the part of free webinars. One of the first things we did was we monitored the sort of top 400 retailers in the UK, looking at their websites, how heavy were their landing pages, what sort of technology was in place. And what we found was there was a lot of potentially quick wins for a lot of retailers. So 31% of the people we monitored, there was some really sort of quick and easy savings that could be made on them pages to make them load faster. And certainly, as we're getting up to Black Friday, one thing to watch is, if you can make those quick and easy changes, things like caching, compression of images, can really help out when we get to those big events if you tackle all the easy little things. So if anyone wants to know where they sit in that panel of 400, do let us know. There was a lot of things. I think ultimately, what it all boils down to and what Andy's presentation started with it's absolutely key to understand, these days it's not just about making sure your website stays up, but it's about making sure it stays up, the user experience is great, but also that you don't spend so much money doing that you sacrifice the potential profits you can make from one of the biggest times of the year. So doing it all within having in front of mind how much money will we actually make from getting faster, from being available, and from having the website there. So really keen to think about that. It's absolutely important that you have that front of mind while you're planning what you do. So certainly, we're hoping to see less websites go down this year, and I think we will. And I think we'll also see a lot of retailers spread the trading throughout this period. But that's enough for me. I wanna move on to the Q&A. We've got a couple of questions all stacked up here. Do keep them coming. And the first one is from Kim, asking just how would you deal with a known platform that's a bottleneck?
It's a good question, Kim. So I think it's about understanding really the nature of that bottleneck, if there is anything you could do about it. Understand that, so complete your testing, understand what you can do with it, and then go back to the first point of understanding where you need to be. So is there a way that you can control your peak such that you can minimize the impact of that bottleneck? Is there another set of tooling that you could use to bypass that bottleneck? So would the introduction of something like a CDN layer remove that bottleneck? Or is there other elements of traffic that you can remove during peak events to, again, mitigate that particular bottleneck? So we can look at things like bot traffic. Could you remove bot traffic? Is there types of users on your system that you could route to other areas of the website that mitigate that bottleneck? Is there anything within your system that you can do to bypass it? Failing that, you would need to look at a system like the Traffic Defender system that we talked about to understand that if you're hitting that bottleneck and you've got more traffic that you can handle then at least you're processing as many users as you can, and you're not ending up losing traffic and losing customers in the long term. You're getting a flow of transactions the highest possible.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think from my perspective, what I've seen a lot of people do as well is, communicate through the business that there is that known bottleneck. I think quite often IT has a real challenge communicating to marketing that actually we can't deal with every customer all at once. If you throw 1 million customers at once, they might want to, but certainly, I think it's important that everyone throughout the business understands the bottlenecks. Once we're in that position, then I think it can be a little bit easier to say, you've got a marketing email campaign go out. Why don't you stagger it? Let's try not having the marketing campaign email go out at the same time we've got a TV advert. Let's not push product offers on everything all the time. At the same time, let's not email our best customers as well as all the existing customers. There's things that marketing can do to certainly help us. I think one of the key things is getting everyone in the business aligned. If you do have a known bottleneck, and then I think you can obviously, there's the bits where Andy said you can do to fix it, and the other option is if it's a bottleneck you can remove things like search. We see a lot of people toggle functionality off during peaks to help them stay up, and particularly if certain bottlenecks are CPU intensive, is it worth you having it in if it's going to risk taking the website down? So really interesting things we've seen tackle there. So yeah, a couple of last questions. If anyone's getting any more, if they just want to submit them. I think a really interesting one from James, which was, what are the most common sort of things that trip people up? I think that's, hopefully you've covered it in depth there, Andy, in your section and how to spot them. But what would you say are the most common things we see working with people that they tend to get maybe miss?
I would say one fairly common one is the impact of third parties, and a common mistake, and it's I think a logical mistake sometimes, is that when people are doing performance testing, they remove their third parties from that so that they can test just their own system, or because their third parties aren't willing to let them performance test. There's a number of different things, but that then can come back to bite them when they're actually under peak load. The other one we see is testing in environments that are not production-like, so that when they're actually hit by peak events, they see issues that have not appeared because there were elements of the infrastructure that wasn't in production, that wasn't in the test platform, or misunderstanding the nature of their peak traffic. Again, is a fairly common one, in that if you look at your typical traffic and you're basing your performance testing on that, then you may well find that on peak days people behave differently. Particularly if you're driving people to one particular offer, and you need to understand the impact of how people, the impact on your system of lots of people doing that one activity, rather than just your same as your normal traffic but ramped up. So I think there's some examples. I don't know if you've got any to add to that, Tom.
Yeah, I think the only other one I've seen that trips people up is the obvious hardware constraint bottleneck. So a lot of people do testing, they tend never to sort of hit a level, but what we find once a lot of people have tuned everything on the site is it can be the things you think, the things that you think are bomb-proof actually have a throughput limit that you just haven't seen or reached before. Things like hardware, firewalls, intrusion protection systems, those kind of bottlenecks, WAFs, load balancers. A lot of the time in testing, once all the obvious bits are removed, it comes down to the bottleneck on the load balancer. And particularly with this amount of time leading up to peak, it's definitely one thing to be concerned about, because often people don't have the budget or time to replace such a critical piece of kit at this time. So yeah, that just the hardware one would be the only obvious one, and I would pick up on that people make a mistake. And yeah, I think just to back, I think one of the best points you mentioned there, Andy, was that customer behavior is not the same on Black Friday as it is day to day. So if you load test on, we've seen this before, you'd load test for businesses and then they create a totally different page with a totally different structure, totally different way of working for Black Friday specifically. Make sure you're testing the actual activity that retailers are going to, customers are going to do on your site on Black Friday.
I think just to add one more onto that, which is related to what Tom was just saying, possibly the most common cause we see of people tripping up on Black Friday or other peak events is last minute changes, where there's a little bit of functionality that goes in at the last minute without having been properly tested. Whether it was big or small, sometimes people think it's innocuous, but you quite often see that then becomes the cause of an unexpected bottleneck.
Absolutely. And so the final question, I think a bit of a difficult one actually from Jim, but we'll try and answer it as best we can. Is there any particular e-com platform you see as being best for kind of Black Friday?
So from my point of view, not particularly. We've looked at this in the past and we've seen very, very good performance from e-commerce platforms and very poor performance from the same e-commerce platform. It is about making sure that you optimize, you're building you've implemented the platform correctly, you're optimizing it for the performance you want, you've got appropriate hardware. So there is, I don't think there's, from our point of view, any that we've particularly seen and we've thought those are always more performant than others. And that's from dealing with a range of the big enterprise ones and open source ones as well.
Yep, absolutely. So I think that draws us to an end. If anyone does have any more questions, do feel free to submit them, and we can follow up on email. If anyone's got any questions, please do get in touch. Like I said, if you want to know how your website performed in that panel of the 400 that we monitored, where you sit in comparison to your rivals, and are there any quick wins you could potentially implement ahead of Black Friday, do let us know. We can share those results with you and show you where you stand. But I'd just like to take this moment just to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Andy, for your time, and it's been really useful. We hope you've all enjoyed it, and hope everyone else has a successful sort of Christmas trading period. Thank you.
Thank you.